Hello friends, welcome to my channel Heartbreak Stories. I invite you to check out the statues during the Fires Festival and listen to a new and interesting story. Let's go!
Some men are overlooked their whole lives, not because they lack power, but because they never needed anyone to see it. Today's story is about one of those men. Now let's listen.
She brought her elite friends to a resort I funded. Her friends sneered at me at check-in. My wife laughed. I nodded and walked out. What none of them knew, my name was already on the wall, and I had one phone call left to make. My name is Raymond Ellison. I'm 48 years old. I run a port logistics holding company out of Charleston, South Carolina, which is a fancy way of saying I manage the movement of cargo through one of the busiest shipping corridors on the East Coast. It's not glamorous work. It doesn't make headlines, but it keeps the lights on for about 400 employees and, for the better part of 2 decades, kept Diane in yoga classes, weekend trips to Savannah, and a lifestyle she described to her friends as finally getting somewhere. I met Diane when I was 29. She was 24, sharp, funny, and had this way of walking into a room like she was already running it. I liked that about her back then. I thought it meant confidence. I didn't realize until much later that what I was seeing wasn't confidence. It was appetite. We married within 2 years. No kids, which was her preference, and, honestly, not something I pushed back on. We had good years. We really did. I worked long hours, and she carved out her own thing. A business coaching practice she built from the ground up targeting small local businesses. It wasn't making serious money, but she loved it, and I supported it the way I supported everything she did. Without conditions and without complaint. Somewhere around year 8, something shifted. It started small. She joined a tennis club. Fine. Then a charity committee. Fine. Then a wellness circle, a wine tasting group, and something called an executive women's network, which, as far as I could tell, was mostly lunch with people who like to use the word curated a lot. Each new group came with new friends, and each new friend came with new expectations about what our life should look like. That's when she started being embarrassed by things. The 2019 F-150 in the driveway. The fact that I liked fishing on weekends. The way I dressed. Plain shirts, dark pants, nothing flashy. She never said it outright, but I could feel the temperature drop every time I showed up at one of her events looking like myself. What she didn't know, what she had never bothered to find out, was that I had restructured every significant asset I owned into a family trust nearly 3 years before all of this began to unravel. Not because I suspected her. Not yet. I did it because my father, God rest him, always said that quiet money was safe money. The company, the properties, the investments, all of it moved into a legal structure that bore a name she wouldn't have recognized. Ellison Maritime Holdings Trust. My attorney handled it. My accountant confirmed it. Diane signed something at the kitchen table one afternoon while she was answering emails on her laptop and barely looked up from the screen. That detail matters. Remember it. By the time our 14th anniversary came around, I had already started paying attention in a different way. Not suspicious, not paranoid, just observant. I noticed she had a second phone she kept in her gym bag. I noticed she had started consulting a law firm downtown for what she called business planning. I pulled the name of the firm. I recognized it immediately. They specialize in one thing and one thing only: high-asset divorce proceedings. So when I booked a weekend at Thornwood Resort on the Carolina coast, a place I had quietly co-funded through the trust 4 years earlier, which is a detail I'll come back to, I wasn't doing it out of desperation. I wasn't trying to save anything. I was setting the table for the last meal. I had the concierge prepare everything personally. 2 oceanfront villas, a private dinner reservation, a bottle of the Burgundy she cried over during a vineyard tour in 2019. I even asked them to leave fresh gardenias on the nightstand. She used to love gardenias. When I told her about the trip, she smiled, that thin, careful smile I'd come to read like a weather forecast, and said we should bring some friends. I asked, gently, if we could make it just the 2 of us this time. She tilted her head like I'd said something in a foreign language. "You'll enjoy them," she said, already turning back to her phone. "They're exactly the kind of people you should be spending time with." I let it go. I had a reason to. The weekend was 3 weeks away. I had phone calls to make first. The drive to Thornwood Resort takes about 90 minutes from Charleston if you avoid I-26 on a Friday afternoon. I drove separately. Diane rode with Felicia and the others. which told me everything I needed to know about where I ranked in the seating chart of her new life. I arrived first, parked in the rear lot, used a side entrance the resort staff had shown me during a property walkthrough 2 years prior, and made my way to the private cottage tucked behind the east garden wall. Unit 12. No signage, no number plate on the door, just a brushed brass handle and a keypad. My code, my cottage, my name, technically on the trust documents that helped finance the East Wing renovation. I set my bag down, changed into a clean shirt, and walked to the main lobby through the garden path. I wanted to be visible when they arrived. I wanted to be standing right there. They came in at 4:30. Felicia led the pack. Platinum hair, oversized sunglasses she hadn't bothered to remove indoors, a rolling bag that cost more than most people's rent. Behind her came Diane, then 2 other couples I vaguely recognized from charity event photos on Diane's phone. 6 people total, plus me. 7 on a reservation I had paid for in full, including the upgrades Diane had quietly added to the booking using our joint card the week before. I stepped forward. Diane saw me, and her expression did something complicated. Surprise, then recovery, then a performance of warmth. "You made good time," she said, kissing my cheek with the precision of someone marking a box. I smiled and turned to greet the others. Felicia looked me over the way people look at furniture they're deciding whether to keep. She didn't offer her hand. At the front desk, the check-in process began. The concierge, a composed young man named Daniel who I had spoken with twice on the phone that week, pulled up the reservation and began confirming the villa assignments. He was professional, unhurried. He gave no indication that he knew anything about the trust or my history with the property, which was exactly as I had instructed. That was when Felicia spoke. She was half turned toward Diane, volume just loud enough to carry, and she said it with the casual ease of someone stating a well-known fact. "You know, this place only keeps its rooms for a certain kind of guest. They don't let just anyone through the door." She wasn't looking at me when she said it, but everyone in the group knew it was aimed at me. I watched Diane. That was the moment, the one I had been quietly waiting for. The moment that would tell me everything I needed confirmed. She could have laughed it off. She could have said, "Oh, stop it, Felicia." She could have done 100 small, decent things. Instead, she pressed her lips together in that thin, private smile and looked away toward the window. That was enough for me. I turned to Daniel at the desk. "Thanks for your help," I said quietly. He met my eyes for exactly 1 second. "Of course, Mr. Ellison. Everything is in order." I picked up my key card, not the one he slid across the desk for the villa, but the secondary card I'd requested for the cottage, and I walked toward the East Garden exit without another word. No raised voice. No suitcase drama. No scene. I heard Felicia say something behind me, and then laughter, soft and dismissive, the kind that trails after someone who's already left the room. I kept walking. The cottage was cool and quiet. I poured a glass of water from the pitcher on the counter, sat in the chair by the window, and opened the notebook I'd brought. 3 names were written on the first page in my own handwriting. My attorney, Gordon Falk, my accountant, Dale Pruitt, and Franklin Oakes, chairman of the Coastal Resorts Collective Board, a man who had played poker with my father for 15 years and once told me at a funeral that loyalty was the only currency that didn't devalue. I picked up my phone and called Franklin first. He answered on the second ring, the way he always did. "Raymond." His voice was steady, warm, and unsurprised. "I'm on property," I told him. It happened the way I thought it would. A brief silence. Then, "I'll make a call within the hour." "Discreet," I said. "Always," he replied, and the line went quiet. I set the phone down and looked out the window at the garden. The gardenias along the stone path were in full bloom. Nobody out there to notice them. I sat with that for a while, the particular stillness of a decision already made, already in motion, with nothing left to do but wait for it to arrive. The East Garden path at Thornwood winds past a row of magnolias before it opens up to the main terrace. I took that path deliberately the next morning, early enough that most guests were still sleeping off the previous night's welcome drinks. I wanted to see the property the way I always saw it, quietly, before anyone else showed up to claim it. Near the terrace entrance, mounted flush against the stone archway, was a small brass plaque. Nothing ostentatious. 6 inches wide, maybe 8 inches tall, with clean engraved letters that most guests walked past without a second glance. I had asked for it to be installed exactly that way. Understated. present without demanding attention. It read, "In recognition of EM Holdings Trust, for investment in the Thornwood East Wing restoration and the enduring standard of quiet excellence. My father's initials. My trust. My ask." I stood there for a moment, coffee in hand, and then kept walking. By mid-morning, Diane's group had claimed the main cabana area with the efficiency of people who are very practiced at occupying space. Felicia had already rearranged the lounge chairs. Diane was on her second mimosa, working the group like a hostess at her own private club. The two other couples, whose names I had not yet learned and did not particularly want to, were well into the comfortable rhythm of people on someone else's dime. Nobody asked where I was. I watched from the terrace above for about 10 minutes. Then I went back to the cottage and answered emails until noon. It was Judith who noticed the plaque. I learned this later from Daniel at the concierge desk, who had been nearby and overheard the exchange. Judith was the quietest of the group, a woman in her mid-40s who wore simple clothes and seemed vaguely uncomfortable with the loudness around her. She had fallen behind as the group moved from the spa corridor back toward the cabanas, and she'd stopped in front of the archway. She read the plaque twice. Then she called back to Diane, who was 3 steps ahead. "Diane, this inscription. EM Holdings. What's the E stand for?" Diane barely turned around. "Some old donor. These places name everything after someone. It means nothing." Judith didn't move right away. She looked at the plaque again, and according to Daniel, her expression was the particular kind that belongs to a person turning something over very carefully in their mind. She didn't say anything else. Not yet. That afternoon, the small frictions began, though no one recognized them as deliberate. The complimentary champagne that had been delivered to their cabana the evening before did not reappear. The dedicated attendant who had handled their towel request that morning was reassigned to another section. When Felicia called the spa to confirm her afternoon treatment, she was told there had been a scheduling adjustment and someone would follow up. Someone did not follow up. Felicia was agitated by dinner. Diane kept her composed by ordering from the a la carte menu with the authority of someone who assumed their credits still ran deep. It did for now, but Daniel had already flagged the group to the property manager, and the property manager had already received a call from the trust administrator asking that the reservation status be reviewed against current guest conduct protocols. The gears were turning, slowly, silently, the way the best mechanisms always do. That evening I sat on the cottage porch and called my attorney, Gordon Falk. We spoke for 22 minutes. By the end of the call, the preliminary documentation for the divorce response was finalized. The asset protection structure was confirmed intact. The marital estate, as far as the courts were concerned, was essentially a furnished rental. Gordon paused before we hung up and said, "She's going to be very surprised, Raymond." "She should have read what she signed," I replied. He didn't disagree. The call came through to the property manager's office at 11:43 in the morning. I know the time because I was the one who asked Franklin to make it then, after the group had settled into their late morning poolside routine and before the lunch service began, the window when they would be comfortable and distracted. Franklin Oaks had known my father since the early days of the Coastal Resort Collective, back when the consortium was 3 properties and a handshake agreement between men who believed in building things that lasted. Franklin was now chairman of the board of all 9 properties, including Thornwood. He was 71 years old, wore the same style of plain dark suit regardless of occasion, and had a voice that made you feel like the room had just gotten smaller. The property manager, a composed man named Richard Holt who had been with Thornwood for 11 years, picked up on the first ring. I was not in the room for the call, but Richard told me about it afterward, almost word for word. Franklin did not introduce himself by title. He simply said his name, and Richard's posture changed immediately. Franklin asked whether Richard was aware that the trust's primary benefactor had departed the property the previous afternoon without a formal checkout. Richard confirmed he was aware. Franklin asked whether any protocol had been initiated. Richard confirmed it had not, which was, Franklin said, a gap in standard procedure that required immediate correction. The call lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, Richard called the front desk, then the guest services coordinator, then the security supervisor. He pulled the reservation file and cross-referenced it against the trust's internal registry, a database maintained separately from the public booking system. What he found told him everything. The group of 7 occupied villas that technically fell within the East Wing, the wing that EM Holdings Trust had funded in full. The spa they had used that morning, the terrace where they'd had breakfast, the private garden path Felicia had photographed for her social media. All of it sat on square footage that existed because of a decision made in a trust meeting 4 years ago. The plaque near the archway wasn't decoration. It was a deed in miniature. Richard walked to the cottage at noon and knocked twice. I opened the door before he finished the second knock. "Mr. Ellison," he said, steady and professional. "Mr. Oakes has contacted us. We're prepared to proceed however you instruct." Quietly, I told him, "No announcements, no confrontation. Start with services. We're down from there." He nodded once, the way experienced people acknowledge difficult instructions, without comment and without hesitation. "And Richard," I added before he turned, "the woman named Judith in the group. She's not part of this. If she asks for anything reasonable, accommodate her." He noted that without blinking. "Understood." I closed the door and stood at the window. Outside, the magnolias were perfectly still in the afternoon heat. No wind, no sound from the main grounds, just the kind of quiet that arrives when things are exactly where they're supposed to be. By 3 o'clock, the complimentary bar service to their cabana had been suspended. By 4, Felicia's spa rebooking request had been declined. By 5, the dining reservation Diane had made for the group's evening meal had been quietly downgraded from the private terrace to the standard dining room. Diane called the front desk at 5:15, using the voice she reserved for people she expected to fold. The front desk representative was polite, firm, unhelpful in the particular way of someone following clear instructions. I was back on the cottage porch when my phone lit up with a text from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Then I opened it. "This is Judith. I think I know what's happening. I'm sorry. I genuinely am. Jay." I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the table and watched the sun drop toward the tree-line. Some apologies arrived too late to change anything, but they still mean something. I hadn't decided yet what exactly. The morning of day 3 started the way the previous 2 hadn't, with silence where there should have been sound. Felicia was the first one down to the cabana area, which was her habit. She liked to establish territory early, the way certain people do when they're not entirely sure the space belongs to them. She arrived at 7:50 to find the attendance station unoccupied and no fruit tray on the table. She waited. At 8:15, she called the main line from her cell phone and was told someone would look into it shortly. Shortly became 40 minutes. When Diane arrived with the others and found the situation, she handled it the way she always handled inconvenience, by assuming it was temporary and managing the group's mood. "These places have off days," she said, settling into her chair. "They'll sort it." But it didn't sort. The mid-morning coffee service arrived late and lukewarm. The towel replenishment was a single attendant who apologized vaguely about staffing and disappeared. When Felicia attempted to use the private pool reserved for their villa tier, her key card produced a long pause at the reader before blinking red. She tried it 3 times, each attempt tightening the line of her jaw, before turning away without acknowledging the small camera mounted above the entrance. Diane called the front desk at 10:30 with her good voice, steady, measured, the kind of tone that had worked on restaurant managers and hotel supervisors across a dozen cities. She explained the situation. She used the word expectations twice and accommodation once, which she had learned was the word most likely to produce results. The representative listened carefully and said she would escalate the matter to the duty manager. The duty manager did not call back. By noon, the group had gathered in Diane's villa with the tight energy of people who have realized, without wanting to say it out loud, that something has shifted under them. Felicia paced near the window. One of the other women refreshed the resort app repeatedly, watching their booked services disappear one by one, a facial replaced with a currently unavailable notice, a couple's massage showing booking class restricted. "Booking class," Felicia repeated flatly, reading over the woman's shoulder. "What does that even mean?" Nobody answered. Diane sat at the small table near the door, her phone face up, and did not reach for it. I had seen that posture before, in the year her first business venture collapsed, when she would sit very still and perform composure while her mind worked at the problem from every angle. It was the look of a woman who had stopped assuming the problem was external. I watched all of this from the cottage. Not through the cameras. I had stopped checking those by mid-morning. I simply knew how the sequence would go, because I had designed the sequence. Richard Holt was executing it with the quiet precision of a man who understood that dignity was best preserved through understatement. That afternoon, I took a walk along the East Garden path. I was not hiding. If Diane had looked toward the garden from her villa window, she would have seen me. She didn't look. At the main archway, Judith was standing alone in front of the plaque. She heard my footsteps on the gravel and turned. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked at the plaque, then back at me, and I could see in her expression that she had already worked it out. Not the full picture, not the trust structure or the board relationship or the calls that had been made, but the essential thing. The name on the wall. The man who had walked out. EM Holdings, she said quietly. Ellison Maritime. I didn't confirm or deny it. I just stood there. Judith pressed her lips together and looked back at the archway. I've known Diane for 11 years, she said. I used to think she was just ambitious. I made excuses for the other parts. She paused. I don't have any more excuses. You don't owe me an explanation, I told her. I know. She reached into her pocket and handed me a folded note card. I wrote this last night. I almost didn't give it to you. I took it without opening it. She walked back toward the main building without another word, and I stood at the archway for a while, the note card in my hand, the afternoon light catching the brass letters on the plaque. Back at the cottage, I opened it. 6 sentences, clean handwriting. Raymond, I noticed the plaque yesterday morning, and I knew. I want you to know I had no idea about any of it. She told us this was a reconciliation trip. I think some of us believed her. I'm sorry for what happened at check-in. I didn't laugh. Judith. I set it on the desk, next to my notebook. She was right. She hadn't laughed. I had noticed that too.
In a group of 6 people, only one had the decency to say, "I'm sorry," just one, and that tells you everything you need to know about the company Diane chose over her own husband.
The evening of day 3 was when Diane stopped performing and started calculating. I know this because she called me. My phone rang at 7:42. I was on the cottage porch finishing dinner from a tray Richard had arranged. A small, quiet gesture that I appreciated more than I said. I looked at the screen. Her name. I let it ring twice, then answered. Where are you? Her voice was controlled. Not warm, not cold, strategic. On the property, I said. A brief pause. You've been here this whole time. Yes. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear the ocean through her open window, the same ocean I could hear from mine. The services, she said finally. The bookings disappearing. The front desk that suddenly doesn't know anything. That's connected to you. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. She shifted. I heard the small sound of her setting something down. A glass, probably. Raymond, whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. I think we should talk. In person. We are talking. You know what I mean. I leaned back in the chair and looked at the sky, which had gone the deep orange of late Carolina evening. Diane, I want to ask you something, and I'd like you to answer honestly. Did you read the trust acknowledgement you signed at the kitchen table in February of last year? Silence. Did you read it? I repeated. That's not relevant to. It's entirely relevant, I said, keeping my voice level. Because what you signed restructured every significant asset I hold into an entity that predates any divorce filing by 14 months. Your attorney has a draft petition that is built on the assumption that marital assets are accessible. They are not. What you signed removed them from that category entirely. The silence this time had a different quality. Heavier. You knew, she said. The strategy was gone from her voice now. Just the flat fact of it. I knew you weren't happy. I knew you'd been consulting a divorce attorney since March. I knew about the second phone. I knew about the draft filing. I paused. What I didn't know was whether you would let Felicia say what she said at check-in without correcting her. That was the last thing I needed to know. That was a test. Her voice shifted. Not quite anger. Something more like vertigo. This whole trip was a test. This whole trip was a conclusion, I said. There's a difference. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, the careful tone was completely gone, replaced by something rawer. The plaque. EM Holdings. That's you. It's my father's initials. My trust. You funded this resort. Part of it. The East Wing specifically. The spa your friends used. The garden path. The terrace. I heard her exhale. A long, unsteady breath that told me the full weight of it had just landed. Raymond. Diane, I said. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. I ended the call, set the phone down, and finished my dinner. The ocean moved in the darkness below the garden wall, steady and indifferent, the way it always had. I sat with the quiet for a while, not triumphant, not bitter, just present in the particular way of a man who has done what needed doing and is no longer waiting for permission to stop carrying what wasn't his. The note card from Judith was still on the desk inside. I had propped it against the lamp. I wasn't sure yet what to do with it, but I wasn't ready to put it away. Richard Holt knocked on the cottage door at 9 in the morning on day 4. I had been up since 6. Showered, dressed, coffee already finished. I had spent the early hours reviewing a contract summary Gordon Falk had sent overnight. 43 pages of clean, precise language that effectively rendered Diane's divorce strategy obsolete before it could be filed. I had read it twice and signed the final authorization just before 8. When I opened the door, Richard was holding a flat black folder under one arm and wearing the expression of a man who had done something difficult and done it correctly. "Everything is prepared," he said. I stepped back and let him in. He laid the folder on the table and opened it without ceremony. Inside was a printed summary, 2 pages, no letterhead, outlining the formal guest conduct violation under the resort's internal policy. Unauthorized use of trust-affiliated property by parties who had publicly disparaged the trust's primary benefactor. Timestamped security footage from the lobby. An audio transcript of Felicia's comment at check-in. A screenshot of social media post Diane had published the previous evening. A photograph of the East Terrace at sunset with a caption that read, "When you finally know the right people." The post had 19 likes. One of them was from an account registered to Felicia. Below the summary was a second document. The resolution protocol. Services suspended. Guest privileges revoked. Departure to be completed by noon the following day. No public statement. No press contact. Transportation to be arranged discreetly through the resort's contracted car service. "Is the car confirmed?" I asked. "Confirmed for 11 tomorrow morning," Richard replied. "They'll be informed this afternoon." I looked at the folder for a moment without touching it. "When you deliver the notification, I want it done at the cabana. Not in the lobby, not in their rooms. Outside, in the open, where they made the choice to be." Richard absorbed that. "Understood. I'll do it personally." "And Richard, keep it professional. No drama. Just the facts." He nodded once, closed the folder, and picked it up. At the door he paused. "Mr. Ellison, Franklin Oaks asked me to pass along a message. He said to tell you, your father built 3 resorts in this consortium from nothing. He'd have handled it the same way." I held the door open for him without answering. Some things don't need a response. They just need to be heard. That afternoon, I walked the full perimeter of the East Wing, the new spa corridor, the terrace extension, the garden path where the magnolias had been replanted after the renovation. I had funded this wing because my father had always believed that the best investments were the ones you could walk through. Not numbers on a page. Actual ground, actual stone, actual work. He had been right about most things. At the far end of the garden, I sat on a bench near the fountain and called my son, Tyler. He was 24, lived in Charlotte, worked in commercial architecture. We talked every couple of weeks. Nothing dramatic, just the steady maintenance of a relationship built on mutual respect and the shared understanding that neither of us needed the other to perform emotions we weren't feeling. I told him the broad strokes, not the details, not the legal mechanics, just that things were ending with Diane and that it had gone the way I expected. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad, I'm going to be honest with you. I never said anything because it wasn't my place. But I'm not surprised. And I think you already knew that." "I did," I said. "You doing okay?" I looked at the fountain. The water moved in clean arcs, indifferent and precise. "Yeah," I said. "Better than I have in a while, actually." We talked for another 10 minutes about his work, a project he was excited about in uptown Charlotte, a trip he was planning in the spring. Normal things. Good things. When we hung up, I sat with the quiet for a few minutes and let it feel like what it was, the beginning of something lighter. The notification was delivered at 3:15 in the afternoon. I watched from the East Garden path, partially screened by the Magnolia Row. I was not hiding. I was simply choosing not to make it about my presence. This was Richard's moment to execute, and he was doing it with the kind of quiet authority that the situation deserved. The group was at the cabana. All 6 of them. Diane, Felicia, the 2 couples, and one other woman whose name I had never learned. They were in various states of restless arrangement. Felicia standing near the railing with a drink, Diane seated with her phone, the others clustered in the strained way of people who are together because leaving would require an explanation. Richard approached from the main path, black folder in hand, jacket on despite the afternoon heat. He stopped at the edge of the cabana space and waited for them to notice him. They did, one by one, the way people notice something they've been dreading. He addressed Diane directly. Clear voice, no preamble. Mrs. Ellison, I need to inform you and your guests of a formal determination made by resort management this afternoon. Felicia straightened immediately. What determination? Richard didn't look at her. He opened the folder, turned it to face Diane, and pointed to the first document. He explained the policy violation calmly, the conduct at check-in, the trust affiliation of the property, the documented record of the incident. He showed the security still. He showed the transcript. He showed the social media screenshot. Diane's face went through several things in quick succession. Recognition, then calculation, then something that might have been, for just a moment, something close to shame. Felicia leaned over to look at the folder, and her jaw tightened. You're saying we violated a policy because of a comment made at check-in? That's absurd. The comment was made in reference to a guest who is a legacy-tier benefactor of this property. Richard replied, steady as a wall. That guest departed the premises without a formal checkout. Under our standing protocol, that triggers a full review of all related bookings. Legacy tier. One of the other women repeated softly. Felicia looked at Diane. Who is he? Who is your husband, exactly? Diane didn't answer. Richard continued. He outlined a resolution. All privileges suspended effective immediately. Departure scheduled for 11 the following morning. Transportation arranged. All remaining charges waived. The matter would be handled with full discretion. No public record. No staff statements. This is retaliation, Felicia said, her voice rising just enough to carry to the nearest staff member, who was very carefully looking elsewhere. This is policy, Richard answered simply. Then he closed the folder, turned to Diane once more, and said it. Calm. Final. The words that had been waiting since the moment at the check-in desk 3 days ago. Ma'am, you and your guests need to come with me. The silence that followed had weight to it. Felicia opened her mouth and closed it. One of the other women reached for her bag without being asked. Diane sat completely still for 4 full seconds, and then she stood. She didn't say anything. She picked up her hat from the chair beside her, put it on with the same controlled precision she applied to everything, and walked toward Richard without looking back. I stepped away from the magnolia row and walked back toward the cottage. I didn't need to see the rest. I already knew how it ended. Inside, I poured a glass of water and sat at the desk. Judith's note card was still propped against the lamp. I opened my phone and sent a message to a number I had saved that morning after Richard confirmed the contact at Diane's request. Judith, thank you for the note. You have nothing to answer for. She replied within 2 minutes. Thank you for saying that. I hope things get better from here. I set the phone down and looked out the window. The garden was going golden in the late afternoon light, the magnolias casting long shadows across the stone path. The fountain turned quietly at the far end. Everything exactly as it had been, untouched, unshaken, built to last.
She put on her hat, walked out without a word, and never looked back for him. And Raymond, he just turned around and went back to his cottage. No victory lap, no satisfaction, just a man who finished what needed to be done.
They left at 11 the following morning. I watched from the cottage window as the black car pulled up to the service entrance. 7 pieces of luggage had been arranged in a neat row along the delivery bay wall, packed by the housekeeping team overnight, with care and without comment. The car service driver stood beside the vehicle with his hands clasped, professionally blank in the way of men hired to move through other people's worst moments without leaving fingerprints on them. Diane came out last. She was dressed well, as always. Dark linen, sunglasses, the kind of controlled presentation that had served her in every difficult room she had ever walked into. She looked at the luggage, then at the car, then briefly, just briefly, toward the east garden wall, as if she expected to find me standing there. I wasn't standing there. I was inside at the desk, watching through the window. There was no satisfaction in it. No particular heaviness either. Just the clean, neutral quality of watching a chapter close. Felicia got in without a word. The others followed. Diane was last. She paused at the car door with her hand on the frame, and for one moment her posture dropped. Not collapse, not drama, just the small involuntary release of a person who has run out of performance. Then she got in, and the door closed, and the car pulled away through the service gate. I called Gordon Falk at noon. "She's gone," I told him. "Good," he said. "Her attorney called my office this morning. They want a preliminary meeting." "What's their position?" "They're floating a modified claim, scaled down from the original petition. Equitable distribution, based on marital contribution, rather than asset division." Gordon paused. "They've figured out the trust structure, or enough of it. What do you recommend?" "I recommend we let them come to the table and see how far they get," he replied. "Your position is strong, Raymond. The trust documentation is clean, the timeline holds, and the acknowledgement form she signed is airtight. Their best realistic outcome is a negotiated settlement on personal property and maybe a short-term support provision. That's a long way from what they drafted." I told him to set the meeting. After the call, I sat with my coffee and thought about the FMBA certificate Diane had displayed in her office. The framed credential from a business school I had never bothered to look up until 6 weeks ago, when Gordon asked me to compile a personal asset summary, and I cross-referenced every document in the house. 45 seconds of searching told me that the issuing institution had lost its regional accreditation 4 years prior and had been operating under a provisional status that most professional organizations did not recognize. The credential was real in the way that a photocopy of a birth certificate is real, present, tangible, and entirely insufficient for the purpose it was being used for. 3 of her current business coaching clients had been referred to her through introductions I had made at industry events over the previous 2 years. None of them knew that. None of them had asked. Within 8 weeks of the divorce filing becoming public record, 2 of those clients quietly ended their contracts. The third sent a polite email expressing gratitude for her service and indicating they were moving in a different direction. Diane told me about this in a voicemail she left during the second month. Not accusing, not angry, just a woman reporting damage in the flat tone of someone who has stopped expecting sympathy. I did not call back. There was nothing useful left to say. Felicia's unraveling was less quiet. Her husband, a hedge fund manager from Colombia, who had been absent from the resort weekend for reasons that became clear later, had been in divorce proceedings of his own during the same week. When the story of the Thornwood incident circulated through their social network, as these things always do, he used it as evidence of her character in his own filing. Felicia disputed this. The dispute became public in the way disputes do when both parties have attorneys who enjoy the process. She lost her seat on the charity committee she had chaired for 3 years. The private membership club they had shared placed her individual status under review. Within 4 months, she had moved from the house in Mount Pleasant to an apartment in North Charleston, which is a sentence that would have meant nothing to you before this story and probably means everything now. I did not arrange any of it. I simply stopped standing in its way. The divorce was finalized 9 months after the Thornwood weekend. The settlement was exactly what Gordon had predicted: personal property, a short-term support provision, and a negotiated sum for Diane's business relocation costs. The trust remained intact. The company remained intact. The east wing of Thornwood Resort continued its operations without interruption, the brass plaque undisturbed beside the archway. Gordon called me the morning the papers were signed and said, "It's done." 2 words. The right 2 words. I sold the F-152 weeks later. Not because I was embarrassed by it. I had never been embarrassed by it. But because I had wanted a different truck for a while and had been telling myself it was practical to wait. I bought a clean, dark blue pickup. Nothing flashy. Good engine. Built for actual use. The man at the dealership tried to upsell me on chrome trim packages, and I declined twice before he stopped asking. Tyler drove down from Charlotte in March, and we spent a weekend on the water doing nothing of particular consequence. Fishing, eating badly, talking about his architecture project, and a woman he was seeing who he described as straightforward, which is underrated. I agreed that it was. At some point on the second evening, he looked at me across the cooler and said, "You seem different." "Different how?" I asked. He thought about it. "Like you stopped waiting for something." I considered that for a while, watching the line in the water. He wasn't wrong. There had been a quality to the last several years. Not unhappiness exactly, but a kind of permanent anticipation, a low-grade alertness that I had mistaken for normal. The feeling that the ground under things was not quite solid, that something was pending, that the real situation had not yet declared itself. That feeling was gone. 4 months after the divorce, I received a short email from Judith. She had left the social circle entirely, she said, which hadn't been as hard as she expected. She had taken a position with a nonprofit in Greenville and seemed, from the tone of her message, lighter than she had been in years. She ended the email with a single line, "I think we both got out of things that were too small for us." I replied the same evening. We have had occasional correspondence since. Nothing significant, just the easy back and forth of two people who respect each other from a comfortable distance. The Trust announced a new initiative in December, an expansion of the Thornwood East Wing to include a restored historic boathouse on the adjacent waterfront property. My father had talked about that boathouse for years and never had the resources to act on it. The project is scheduled for completion in 18 months. Franklin Oaks called when the announcement went out and said, simply, "Your father always wanted that." Good. I stood at the archway plaque one last time before leaving Thornwood the morning after the group departed. Not for any ceremonial reason. I just happened to pass it on the way to my car and stopped for a moment. EM Holdings Trust, for the enduring standard of quiet excellence. My father had never wanted recognition. He built things, maintained things, funded things that outlasted him, and he did it all without needing anyone in the room to know. He used to say that the loudest man at the table is almost never the most important one. That real weight doesn't announce itself. It just holds. I had spent years in a marriage where I was considered the background, the reliable infrastructure, the man who paid for the picture without appearing in it. I used to think that was something I needed to correct, to be seen more, to take up more space, to match the volume of the world Diane was building around herself. I had it exactly backwards. The weight was always there. It just didn't need an audience. I got in the truck and drove south along the coast with the windows down, the ocean moving somewhere off to my left, the road clean and clear ahead. No music, no calls, just the sound of the engine and the salt air and the particular forward-facing quiet of a man who has settled every account and has nothing left to carry.
Raymond never needed an audience. He just built things, protected things, and waited. And when the moment came, he let the truth do what truth always does when you're patient enough to let it work. Thank you for listening today. If this story moved you, subscribe and leave a comment below. Stay strong, and I'll see you in the next one.